The aesthetic movement wasn't philosophical, except that it came to us largely from, well, two things, a couple of publications like the Eastlake Hints on Household Taste was published in America in 1872. Oscar Wilde, who I mentioned last week, came and gave talks, gave lectures around the country, and everybody came to hear Oscar Wilde, and he talked about art for art's sake. And within that, in general, eclecticism, well, eclectic means not necessarily in a negative way. So an eclectic interior has different styles. You can't put a label on it. Many of the interiors were like that. They embraced exotics. Sometimes you had one room that was exotic, like I showed you Lord Leighton's Arab Hall in England, which was, incidentally, if I said last week it was decorated by Lord Leighton, I may not have said, I looked it up, a man named George Aitchison did it. And you don't have to remember that, but if I said, it was bothering me that I think I said to one of the classes that Leighton designed it. So you have an exotic room that's done in Moorish style. You don't say that that's any particular style, except it's exotic. And is it Oriental? Oriental usually meant not really Turkish and Moorish. Really Oriental was the Far East. But in many ways, anything we took from anywhere east of the Middle East was Orientalism. And we were seeing more coming in. We had seen, I showed you last week an image from the Japanese exhibit at London, a London fair. Things like this filtered over to America. There was communication coming. There were objects being imported. And so there was, I mean, we weren't traveling across. We didn't have the ocean liner travel. We weren't, I mean, people were traveling, but not to the extent that they did later. We were interested in what was happening because Europe was still an influence, but we were taking it our own way. One of the famous famous houses of the aesthetic movement, Mark Twain, Samuel Clemens, who wrote the books that you read in everybody read Huckleberry Finn in grade school or high school? Tell me who didn't. Doesn't count if you weren't born. Well, you weren't born here.
Oh, yeah, no.
Okay. Were you?
Born here?
Yeah.
No.
Oh, okay. Because I think if you went to grade school in America.
Oh wait, you mean in America?
No, yeah, I didn't live in New York. In other words, did you have to read Huckleberry Finn in school?
No. I thought you meant.
Everybody had it. Did you know Tom Sawyer? No, that was what I meant. I mean, I don't know. I don't know your generation. I know I read, and I don't think, as a girl, I'm sure I didn't read it for my own interest.
Right.
I mean, you read things like that because that was what everybody read in school. And anyway, have you all heard of Mark Twain?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he's still famous, I think. But anyway, his architect, and this again is what I give you just because I know the name, this is called stick style. This is again along the lines of Eastlake style, where you have wood elements to decorate the exterior of a house cut out by machine. So that you'll see several of the names of architecture that I'm dropping that you should know belong to the 19th century. But anyway, this is the house, and you know what? I can't remember where it is. It's in Connecticut someplace. I obviously haven't been to it. This is a mistake, and I corrected it. I'm having it corrected on the website. I just, in a hurry, captioned it, repeating the name from Portland. This is the interior of the Mark Twain house. The company, Associated Artists, is an important name to know. You've all heard of, I hope, of Louis Comfort Tiffany. Louis Comfort Tiffany was actually the son of the man who founded Tiffany and Company. I think his father was Edward. Louis didn't want to be in the jewelry business. He wanted to be decorating. Well, he became much more famous for doing windows and lamps and other decorative objects, but he formed a decorating company, which was called Associated Artists. And among other things, and I'm going to show you, he did the most famous room, the Veterans Room, at the 7th Regiment Armory a couple of blocks away, but this is one of the company's famous interiors. And we're looking at, why is this aesthetic movement? Well, we see the wallpaper, we see decoration all over, we see the rich colors, we see the gaslight, which tells us about when we're talking about 19th century. We see Oriental carpets, so we're mixing styles, and we can't really, this is as close as I can get to seeing the details. This is a Renaissance revival table, but this is a whole mix of styles put together. You can't really tell. You can tell by all the tchotchkes all over the place that this is a time when people are acquiring stuff not having to match. You can't tell anything by the furniture arrangement, really, because people go through this room. Candace Wheeler, I just wanted to show you a couple of her textiles. Candace Wheeler was for a long time not known at all, but she was the textile designer for Associated Artists and responsible for a lot of the interiors. And a couple of years ago, the Metropolitan did an exhibition on Candace and the ladies who worked with her in designing for Associated Artists. What happens is many times a name comes down in history, the head of the company, and until a researcher like perhaps one of you, if you decide to go into historical research instead of decorating, you read up on something and go look at old documents and find a name mentioned and research that name, and you find out that this is who designed the textiles, not Louis Comfort Tiffany, not whoever else was credited. And what you see here, though, is a change from what we had seen in arts and crafts. And the arts and crafts, and included in American arts and crafts, you see Asian influence, you see Japanese influence in the cleanliness, the simplicity and crispness of the patterns. You don't see as stylized the way we saw in William Morris. These look like real flowers. They're not abstractions of the flowers. And they're a mix of muddy colors, to some degree muted colors. The most famous nearby aesthetic movement house is Olana in Hudson, New York, which is a couple of hours away. You can, again, this is a house open to the public and is a wonderful house to visit, done by Frederick Church, who was possibly the most famous American landscape architect of the time. He had, at that point, painters would have this, just for your interest, he'd do a new painting and he might have an exhibit of that painting in a gallery someplace, and you would come in and pay money just to see his latest big painting. And his big paintings tended to be, a couple of them, not quite the size of this screen, but really gigantic. And, you know, you'd go to see a landscape because it was a landscape of someplace, not near where you lived. Anyway, Church joined with Calvert Vaux, was the architect of this. And Church did the decorating himself. Vaux was a partner with Frederick Law Olmsted in designing Central Park. And Vaux was an architect of other buildings, but most famous to us because of Central Park. And what we see here is sort of more or less an Italian Renaissance revival building, but decorated all over with wonderful abstract kind of Moorish motifs. You go into this house. This is the entry hall. Now this is clear because people are walking through it. All this stuff is here. I imagine that this carpet is, put on for guests. This wasn't probably what he had, but you're looking at wonderful lengths of drapery, painted tile all over the place. It's beautiful. None of us would probably want to live here, but it's wonderfully fun to go through. And all of it is fantasy. And most of it, you see things that look Middle Eastern and Byzantine that he collected in his travels. Just to show you some detail, these are the painted tiles on the fireplace around. And you go into what? You go into the library, you go into the living room. These are livable size rooms. I have to tell you this because later I'm going to show you something that's almost not livable size. But it's just very, very elaborately decorated. And what styles are there? Well, you can see they're sort of Eastern on that. This lady looks sort of Indian. This is, I don't know, a little bit Chinesey. Maybe, I'm not sure, Turkish. It's
Yeah.
that kind of thing. Nothing taken specifically from one design aesthetic. These symmetrical borders could have been earlier. This is a sort of semi-dragon. This is the veterans room of the 7th Regiment Armory. Who's been to the Armory? Now that's only, what, literally 1, 2, 3 blocks away. The entrance is between 69th and, wait a minute, 70th. We're on 69th, so 68. Between 66th and 67th Street on Park Avenue. You can go in there. It's now used for antique shows and exhibitions, but you can go and see this room just by going in before you have to pay admission to whatever show is there. This room, done by Associated Artists, not by Louis Comfort Tiffany himself.